Not the Right? The podcast where we dive into the stories that really matter and often get overlooked by the mainstream. I'm Natasha.
And I'm Nick. Today's story involves a name we've sadly become all too familiar with. Donald Trump, who has a long, troubling history of disrespecting the military and immigrants. This time, we're discussing a recent bombshell report from The Atlantic about Trump's reaction to the tragic murder of U.S. Army soldier Vanessa Guillén.
That's right, Nick. Let's not forget the context here. Trump avoided military service back in the day, claiming fake bone spurs, and we've all heard the reports of him calling our fallen military members suckers and losers. But this story, it feels even more heartbreaking and enraging because it combines Trump's well-documented disdain for immigrants with his disregard for those who've served in the military.
And in Vanessa Guillén's case, she represented both groups. Guillén was just 20 years old when she was murdered in 2020 by a fellow soldier at Fort Hood, Texas. Her death sparked national outrage and investigations into sexual harassment and mistreatment at that Army base. But as tragic as her murder was, it's what happened behind the scenes with Trump that's really shocking.
Vanessa's family, who are Mexican immigrants, were invited to the White House, and Trump promised to help them with the funeral costs. It was a public display of sympathy. He wanted the cameras rolling. But behind closed doors, things played out very differently.
According to The Atlantic, Trump asked his staff about the cost of the funeral. When he was told it came to $60,000, his response was, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury a f***ing Mexican." He even went as far as to say, "Don't pay it." He apparently thought he was being scammed. I mean, this is the same guy who's known for inflating the cost of things left and right, but when it comes to a grieving family, he's worried about getting ripped off.
It's almost unbelievable, but then again, it's not. Trump has shown time and time again how little regard he has for people he sees as other, especially immigrants, and particularly when they're not useful to him anymore.
Exactly. What makes this worse is that Vanessa Guillén was born in the U.S. She was an American citizen, a soldier who signed up to serve her country. And instead of respecting her service and her family's grief, Trump reduced her to a racial slur. It's disgusting.
Let's not forget either that this isn't an isolated incident. Trump's disregard for people in the military and for immigrants has been a running theme. Whether it's calling immigrants criminals and rapists, separating families at the border, or disrespecting POWs like John McCain, he's always been very clear about who he values and who he doesn't.
And the pattern is always the same. Publicly, Trump plays nice when it suits him. He had no problem making a big show of sympathy for Vanessa's family on TV, but privately, he showed his true colors. A spokesperson for Trump denied the story, calling it a lie. But when you look at the consistency of his behavior over the years, it's hard to take those denials seriously.
What makes this even more tragic is that Guillén's family never received any reimbursement from the White House for her funeral. Portions of the costs were covered by donations and the Army. So Trump made promises, played politics, and then completely dropped the ball when it came to actually supporting this family.
It's just another example of how he uses people. In this case, he used the Guillén family's pain for a photo op, and then turned his back on them when the cameras were off.
And we need to keep talking about this. It's not just about Vanessa Guillén. Her story represents so many others, so many families that have been mistreated, disrespected, or flat out ignored by people in power.
Exactly, Natasha. And while this is hard to hear, it's important that we don't let these stories get buried. Guillén's life and her family's grief are worth far more than $60,000 or a political gesture. She deserved better from her commander-in-chief, and so do all the people Trump's policies and actions have hurt.
We'll continue to cover stories like this, ones that expose the truth behind the headlines. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Not the Right. We'll see you next time.